fringe of these social protest movements in America and in Europe, including here in our country, they would hold a different view, that the current system should be overthrown and something else should take its place. But these are still forces very much on the margins, very much a minority.
And very coherent.
But however, I mean, I like the fact that the leader of the opposition, Mr. Miliband, I mean, he said that we shouldn't take these movements for granted. We shouldn't be complacent, and we shouldn't just simply dismiss some of the more radical manifestations of dissent, because those radical manifestations of dissent, they may be a tiny fringe at present. They can grow. We just discussed the far right. Let's discuss the far left. You know, they can also grow.
Can we do that in the second half? Because I want to put the same proposition to Jeremy. I mean, are we? You know, we've had these great sort of hand-wringing, it's all over stuff. Oswald Spengler's The Decline of the West, and then we have The Triumph of the West in the 1990s. Not such a good book, but as I said, Fukuyama, The End of History, because everything had come to broadly a kind of consensus. Are we seeing? Is it just a turn in the page? We're not seeing the book being thrown away.
No, we're not. I mean, I think it's very, in my view of all of this, I never bought into Clash of Civilizations or any of that.
Go on, but let's talk about it. Nor did I.
Any of that stuff. I mean, obviously the Far East and Asia is a different matter, but shall we say the world from Persia all the way to the Atlantic was connected with the enormous explosion of thought and culture and the rest of it. Three great religions, all founded within a short distance of each other, and after all, think about William Shakespeare, what he wrote about. I like to point out to people, you know, what's Othello's background then? Othello is the Turk of the story. So I think that's important. In my view, there's been an important shift of opinion in the United States. I was there only last month, and I wasn't in New York, but I was in Washington, and I looked at the protesters who'd occupied some of the public lawned areas in front of the White House. And the point that was interesting was they were not being viewed in a hostile way by the public passing by. You know, if you'd been there in 2005, those sorts of protesters in Washington would have been subject to ridicule and very hostile behaviour just from the ordinary people passing in the street. That's shifted. That's interesting. I submit.
Well, I thank you very much. You're both wonderful, because you lead us on to the next thing that we must discuss. Where is America? And let's start with the administration of Barack Obama. This sort of rather strange approach. Rightly, one can of course appreciate why they're so worried about what's going on in the Eurozone, but the stance seems rather peculiar, that even elements in the Democrat camp are sort of jabbing fingers and say it's all your wretched indebtedness, you're profligate, you wasted money on welfare. Garbage. I mean, look at the general state of indebtedness of the US, the fact that they've...
Indeed.
You know, Stiglitz and the $3 trillion wars. I mean,
yes.
Could you throw some light on where Obama and co. and his group are coming from?
Well, I think it's not good news. I mean, my principal interest is Middle East politics,
yes.
and so I always come at it from that direction. And when President Obama spoke of his respect for the Islamic Republic of Iran in those words, that was good to hear. And it was also very good to hear his speech in Cairo in the summer of 2008. But the fact of the matter is that since these events, absolutely no follow-up at all. It's a desperately discouraging picture. And I think those who imagine that Obama will do something big on the Middle East after he's won a second term are just being wishful. I think he's an American nationalist, first, second, and third, and you know, that's unfortunately guiding the administration,
and seems to be as anti-European, curiously, as elements in the George W. Bush administration, possibly even more so. I raised it in the programme last week, but one of his campaign organisers for re-election was saying, well, we fear that Angela Merkel is going to lose the re-election for President Obama. That's an absurd thing to say, and
yes.
It's absurdly irresponsible to say it.
Yes.
And it's not collegiate at all. And, you know, what price? North Atlantic solidarity.
Yes, I mean, I have, as a participant in conferences, I've seen considerable hostility between German and American officials. They don't get on.
Yeah. Now, there's another thing that we were talking about just before we came on air. There is a peculiar thing has happened in that it has been so blatant. It's the embrace, almost physical, of President Obama and the Prime Minister of Australia. What on earth is going on? Is Obama saying that really we have no interest in this storm? It's not a storm, it's a big storm, a fiscal financial storm in Europe, and we see ourselves as primarily as a Pacific power, and we must address China. What was this agreement? It's a very strange agreement, isn't it? Because it's more image than substance. Well, they're putting troops into Australia for the first time
since the Second World War.
Since the Second World War, but there are very few of them.
Well, there's right now it's very few, but it will culminate to 2,500. But by the end of 2012, I believe, and they will be based in Darwin, the naval base in northern Australia. But I don't think that's come on a whim. It's a surprise to many people, but I think it's the culmination of a consultative process that's been going on since 2006. I stand corrected on that with regards to the date, but it's been going on for some years. And I think if we just stick to local issues there, I mean, as far as Australia is concerned, this deployment is in keeping with very profound local fears about the rise of China. And I think that there's no doubt whatsoever that this deployment is first foremost directed towards meeting that potential threat. Not necessarily a military threat, but a threat of perceptions, that China is now really this rising dragon, and that it's well on its way, it's well on the latter course of the trajectory of displacing the United States as the preeminent power in that part of the world. But just to address your question about the US now perceiving itself or describing itself as foremost a Pacific power, I would disagree with you on that. I think the US is still primarily interested in projecting itself as a global power. Its priorities clearly shift. They align and realign depending on what's going on. But I think the US still sees itself as a global power. But interestingly, that's one part of the world where the United States really feels that it may lose control. Not militarily. I don't think anybody can envisage military conflict between the US and China, but on other fronts.
You're both involved in security, and it's a thing that a dog that hasn't barked, as we say, from the Euro crisis, as well as I agree with you, the European project, let's put it that way, of the EU, the Eurozone, whatever, is under pressure, and it's going to change. It is quite clearly not going to break up. But what is not generally realised is the concomitant, the PAL, the other half of that in security terms, because that's the way Europe has done it. NATO is under pressure. This is where I can bring, I don't say expertise because I'm an expert in nothing, but it's experience. I have witnessed the United States at work on the ground in Afghanistan a lot, a little bit more than I did in Iraq, and I've seen that. It is quite clear what's going on. They are sending subliminal messages, not verbal messages. They don't trust the Europeans anymore. The Brits are not seen as Europeans there, but it's let's get the old gang together again. Britain, Canada, Australia, New Zealand.
The Anglo-Saxon powers.
The Anglo-Saxon powers. And actually, it's where people who are ready, willing, and very capable. They're more willing than capable at the moment, but as a medium European military power and looking to the future, Poland, for example, the Americans are more or less saying we're not interested. The Americans are making polite noises. Now France is reintegrated in theory, but not in practice. They haven't done much to do it into the military structure of NATO. And it's very, very, it's palpable. You can feel it. What you have just described about slowly building up Australia, because that's a balanced interest, and Europe must look after its backyard. And it's very, very interesting how they're playing Britain in this. And they're furious that Britain's cutting its defences so much. And they see Britain as one of the little bridges to the new kind of arrangement, I conjecture.
I mean, 2 points very quickly. I think this idea of an Anglo-Saxon shield, if you like, I mean, that is certainly true. And let's not forget that beyond the purely military sphere, if you look at the security and intelligence sphere, this Anglo-Saxon empire, if you like, signals intelligence, for example, Echelon and all these other...
Special forces.
And also special, I mean, in the background, they've always been the predominant top dogs, if you will, in international security, and they will remain so. Militarily, yes, I think there is an attempt by the United States to beef up this concept of an Anglo-Saxon kind of global force. But I think when you're talking about NATO, the arguments are much more nuanced. Yes, the Americans are disappointed with some of the core European powers, especially in Afghanistan. And yes, the Americans will always admire the Brits. Even in Iraq, where American commanders are very angry at this, what they saw as a premature British disengagement. But these European powers tried to rehabilitate themselves in Libya. They did their best. But militarily, they were found wanting, because if it wasn't for that American contribution to the Libyan war effort, particularly in the intelligence sphere, where the Europeans had no idea what was going on the ground, it was only when the United States deployed the full extent of their intelligence capability that we began to understand who is actually fighting, doing the fighting on the ground in Libya. And there are profound concerns about the very nature of some of these insurgents groups which have now seized power in Libya. But even in Libya, where the Europeans attempted a measure of rehabilitation, that really didn't do the trick. It's only when decisive American firepower and decisive American software, i.e. in the form of intelligence capability, comes into play that you get a decisive outcome. And I think, I mean, this is a very serious issue. I mean, how can the Europeans address this? I mean, superficially, of course, they can raise their defense budgets. It's not very feasible.
A chance.
Absolutely
not a chance.
Not under the current conditions. No.
Can we go back to the European crisis, the social crisis, as you say? And I think there is a profound crisis of leadership, because it's very interesting how you get people, really hard-working bankers, like the two great Italians, the Super Marios, Draghi at the European Central Bank and Mr. Monti, the new Prime Minister. But there is a sort of a thirst for leadership, but the kind of leadership, I keep on bringing up the name here, but given the crisis of the 20s and the 30s, there's no figure like Keynes. There's nobody that says, I have a vision which will take us forward. This is the way you should do it. By the way, I personally feel that we could do jolly well with Keynes, John Maynard Keynes, back now, because he would bring home a few home truths about this very serious question of youth unemployment, which is becoming very serious throughout Europe. But there is a crisis of leadership, there's a crisis of confidence, and this is being manifested in terms of the youth that you've described. And you quoted Ed Miliband saying you've got to take these groups, you can't write them off. Where do you think the groups of protest from the left are taking us now?
Well, and also, I mean, you just cast your mind back to the riots that we had in London in August. Very serious, I think. And I think Miliband had something to say about that as well. But I think the left ideologically is in retreat. It has been for a long time.
Yes.
You read their literature, it's terribly hollow. You know, the left once was very vibrant. I mean,
instead of the left, it's green. In a nutshell.
It's like, Jeremy, because Marx has failed. Marx is the light that failed.
Well, no, because actually Marx, to a significant extent, has won. Because actually, the bizarre thing about it is, if you look critically at how all of us think and talk, we all still buy into materialism.
We buy into materialism. We're aware of consciousness. We're aware of contradiction. Yes,
yes, but we just don't go for the planned economy. I mean, so there we are. I mean, no. So Marx, in a sense, has won.